Design has to be human-centric. The client is usually management, and management is not a human being. So when design briefs are given to us, we always say, okay, who's the end user? Can we talk to him? And if the client says, no, you cannot talk to him, you talk to me, we usually end up very nicely saying, okay, I don't think we can work on this because we cannot bring in value. How can you bring value to a project or any kind of product if you do not get to see or meet the end user and understand their behavioral traits? Okay, the client wanted to shift their registered office from Bangalore to Mumbai. I guess mainly because they're from the financial sector and it makes a lot of sense to be in the financial capital of the country. And so we got involved at a very early stage, and luckily we'd done some projects for this client in the past, and we know how the culture is there in the Bangalore office. We've also seen the Bangalore office several times. And so that office was built several years back when it was still sort of okay to have, workstations with high partitions, private offices in the sort of all corners of the office. But sort of design trends have changed, people's outlook have changed, there are better products as well. And so invariably there was going to be design change. Our challenge is that how do you, and mind it, there was about 300 people who were going to shift from Bangalore to Bombay. So not only was it a psychological challenge for them to adjust to a new city with new schools for the children, new houses, new food, all kinds of things, but it would also be a big challenge because they would shift to a new whole office setup. So the whole thing was changing. And somehow we had to make these people comfortable that when they're coming to work, at least that much is not changed, or it has actually improved, or it has actually become better. So we were faced not only with a design sort of solution, a design challenge, but even an HR challenge. How do you actually make sure that you're able to retain people by giving a design wherein the relationship between staff actually improves and their productivity goes up? So we got this design brief in an Excel sheet from the client, which showed the number of staff and the number of rooms that they thought they required based on the numbers. And like in many other projects, there was this belief that if you have so many levels of hierarchy, you probably need so many types of workstations in an office. We went back, we did a lot of study of the organization, we observed the people, and we sort of convinced the client that if you have, say, 5 levels of hierarchy, it does not necessarily mean that you need 5 types of workstations. Okay, strange as it might sound, but usually, typically, what we saw is the senior most guys in the office actually spend less and less time in the office because they're either traveling for meetings or traveling out of town or out of the country. So if you really think, they actually need the smallest space. The CEO or the MD, he actually requires the smallest workstation. Whereas the guys who are doing the back-end work in the office and they're sitting in the office for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day, they need the most comfortable desk in the office. So this kind of radical thinking went into our brainstorming sessions. And what we have now is that actually just 2 types of workstations, although they have about 5 or 6 levels of hierarchies in the organization. And you do these small little things, in the manager's thing, the same table, but you add this small little partition, which sort of, shows the difference that, okay, he's the manager, with a little bit of color. So this is not exactly discrimination, but of course, there's a sense of respect when you do these small little things for that manager. The entire design came out of actually observing people at their Bangalore office and at other offices in Mumbai. We follow a 4-step approach to any projects. The first thing there is to observe, and the second thing there is to ideate, third is to prototype, and the last thing, of course, is execution. But so, at the observation stage, what we essentially do is, typically what happens is that the client will give a design brief to you, and the design brief is essentially an Excel sheet with lots of numbers. Now, numbers do not make sense to any designer, be it an interior designer or an architect or any product designer. Unless you observe and understand the end user at a very fundamental level, it is nearly impossible for you to come up with a design which will actually give a wow effect. And otherwise, you're just doing sort of incremental value addition to any sort of design process. So when you do observation, we actually sort of observe the people, the end users who will actually be using a space. And that's what we did here as well. And and you come up with all these strange things, which the client that we understand typically is the management. Management would never be able to give you those kind of insights. For example, this table, someone could actually, you see a lot of people sitting on tables. You see people leaning against a water cooler once upon a time. Now, these are very odd traits because human beings are very good experts at adjusting their bodies and themselves to odd situations. So when we observe, we actually sometimes do sort of videography. We watch CCTV footage to understand how people, the end users, actually behave in an existing scenario, and then try and see what they're not telling or what they're not doing, and try and imagine how they will behave under a new kind of a scenario or new workplace. Now, observation is not only done at the sort of end user level, but you also first observe the space which is like a base for you to create the design upon. And many things which are site related, which you will not be able to do unless you actually observe how a particular empty site behaves throughout the entire 24 hours. So we've just put a camera and we've done time-lapse photography and observe how the site actually behaves in terms of not only temperature. We've actually monitored temperature, how the lighting behaves, how much of light actually comes into the space. What's the time now? It's like 11 o'clock in the morning, and there are no lights. No lights are put on here. So for majority of the working hours in this space, you actually do not need any artificial lighting, except in the private offices. Now, what we've done in this design is that we've kept the private offices towards the central core, and we've kept the sort of windows on the east and the west all open. So you have a lot of light streaming in the morning, and again, a lot of light coming in from the afternoon. So, when you do a lot of observation, you get a lot of insights, and you have to make sense of these insights. Now, sort of hundreds of hours of video footage or sort of research that you do is meaningless if you cannot get the insights from them and actually come to ideation. So the next level really is ideation. So how, what kind of ideas do you generate out of the insights that you get? For example, in Bangalore, we noticed that a lot of people would have breakfast in these nice little South Indian restaurants, and there was one right outside the client's office, so where there would be a section where people would sort of give the order, and you would actually go and pick up your idli and dosa, and there would be a small round table. You'd stand there and you'd eat there. And then there will be a section which is called the service section. So you can actually go upstairs. It's usually in the first floor, and be served your coffee and your dosa. And we sort of took inspiration from that. And in our cafeteria, what we actually have is in the center. We have a long table where people can, if they want, they can actually stand and eat as well. And then you have another section where people can sit down and eat like in a regular restaurant. And then, what we extensively do is, of course, prototyping. Now, prototyping in our case has been easy because we use a lot of sort of freely available or easily available, if I may say, tools which are available, computer-based tools. There are very fast, there are tools which will allow you to make animated sort of a walkthrough of a place very quickly. We use a lot of that, and we do not, unlike others, we do not do in the beginning photoreal sort of walkthroughs. We do just sort of like base level massing kind of walkthroughs, which will give a client a very good idea about how the massing will happen. And the prototyping that we do is not always for the client. Sometimes it is for us. Because of course the client gets impressed. Wow, this looks good. This, that. He gives his feedback. But many a times we've seen is that such prototyping, especially when you do 3D modeling, springs surprises. You realize that, oh, this is not working. Oh, there's too much of light coming in here. Oh, there's this sort of hot spot here. How do we tackle that? So when you do quick prototyping, it allows you to go back to your drawing board very quickly and rework on your ideas. We also do a lot of model making. I mean, this is something which is usually taught in architectural colleges, but when you become so-called architects and interior designers, this is something which you give away for prototyping. Of course, architectural models are made for large buildings when the design is frozen, but we use a lot of model making at the prototyping stage. And these are quickly done, cardboard made prototypes. Again, it gives us an idea about the massing, about the lighting, and we throw artificial lights on the model from both sides, all sides, and we put them on the sun, we put them on the natural light, and we do all kinds of experiments, and we document them, we brainstorm on them, and then sort of, again, iterate on them, and then go back to the drawing board and come up with better designs. Now, beyond, of course, the prototyping stage, you then finally execute. So essentially what it means that, we've actually spent probably 70% of our time on this project and many other projects at the pre-design stage, and the execution time is only about sort of 25%. That's the typical ratio that we spend on the entire life cycle of a project. The pre-execution stage is so very important, because if you do not sort of get it right before you put the first nail on the wall, the cost of repairing or improving or correcting is extremely high in our line of work. Today, designing an office is not only about putting desks and chairs. Human beings have begun to expect much more from things that they spend their time on, be it the mobile phone or be it the television that they would buy or coming to work. People come there for an experience. I mean, you look at HR policies. HR managers, the biggest challenge is that what more can you give them beyond the salary? So people, even at the workplaces, have begun to expect much more than a comfortable chair and a desk and a nice cafeteria. It's the overall experience, okay? And so the overall experience is that, how do I relate to my colleague who's sitting right next to me? How do I relate to my boss who's sitting, say, 2 workstations away? And how does this relationship work in a particular environment? Does the environment have an effect on my relationship with my boss? Of course it does. And this is our biggest challenge. How do we make conducive environments where there is positivity, where efficiency is high and productivity eventually is high? At the end of the day, when you build corporate offices, I mean, they're building a new office because of business. I mean, it's not something like your home, where you most of the time building something not only for utility but also to sort of show off a little, okay, nice colors, this and that. But especially in an office, it is not about utility, it's about business. So if your design can increase productivity and efficiency in some way, that's a successful design. So in this project, we had to work together with client teams in New York, Gurgaon, Bangalore, and Mumbai. So everything sort of happened online. So almost every second day there was either a teleconference or a video conference. When we extensively use all modes of telecommunication that the modern world has to offer, from Skype to video conferencing, other modes of video conferencing, cheaper ways to make international calls, all of that. The good thing about working with corporate organizations that they follow standards, and standardization, of course, is the way towards efficiency. If you do not have standards, you end up redesigning all the time. Having said that, I think flexibility also has to be built into standardization itself, and that's real innovative standardization, I would say. Because in a corporate setup, although you like the colors to be maintained, the type of workstations to be maintained, the size of workstations to be maintained across multiple cities, unless you're sensitive towards local cultures and weather and all of that, your design is likely to fail. And that's what we did. We not only sort of followed the standards, but we kept advising the client that, hey, look, this material may not be suitable here. This kind of a partition may not be suitable in this kind of a situation because of so and so local conditions. And this is something typical which you have to do, because you just cannot blindly follow a standard. Because for companies like this, the standards are sometimes made in cities like New York, where the person who made the standard may never have visited this city. Sometimes because of the way we are, I am, our team members are, we're very open and transparent people. I mean, if you're involved in a lot of innovative work, you have to be open and transparent. And we usually end up working with such people. So this organization as well has been a very open and transparent organization. And they wanted to reflect that as well in the design. So what you see is that a completely open and transparent organization. All the partitions are made of glass. You have a lot of light streaming in. Everyone can see each other in the office. Nobody is hiding behind this private office. And there's a lot of line of sight management which happens. All the light which has been used here are energy saving lights. And more interestingly, you do not need to put the lights on throughout the daytime, throughout the working hours, because we've kept the east and the west side, which have large windows, open. So you have a lot of light streaming in from the east in the morning and a lot of light on the other side in the afternoon. All the private offices are in the central core, which means that all the windows are always open. And we understand that the organization has been able to save up to about 70% of the electricity cost compared to what they were spending earlier, just because of this. So design has to be smart. Design has to be sustainable. Design is not something which looks good, but it has to be working for you like your money works in a fixed deposit, right? You have to save money for the client.